Good morning, everybody. Hi, honey. My husband made it. I'm very pleased about that. But don't look at him because he's very shy. My firstborn, Andrew, came 2 weeks early in 1 hour and 40 minutes, start to finish. Felt like a via railway tunnel. The doctor said if I ever got pregnant again, he wanted to be camped out on the hospital grounds like a month before my due date. And he wasn't really that far off the mark. Doctors know a lot, but the fact is, a baby comes when it's good and ready. Not a second sooner and not a second later. And it always makes me think of those seeds in the ground, this dark, damp soil, and there's this seed, a seed, a little tiny hard thing in the dirt, and somehow it knows to grow up and to head towards the light. Reaching for the light, seeking the light is the most natural thing that we do. If the sun shines, we're happy. If it stays dull for too long, we start getting a little grumpy. Light is what we are interested in. And we're not the only species. Anybody here a big fan of miller moths? They were so bad this year out at the mountains. We couldn't read in bed. If I tried to read my Kindle or anything, they'd come and they'd smack into my face and into my glasses because they just couldn't resist the twinkly lights in my lenses. And we finally learned to leave the light on in the laundry room downstairs so they would congregate around that light. And then in the morning, I'd go down early and I'd suck them all up with the shop vac, which I kind of felt bad about at first until I found out how many billions of them there are and how quickly they reproduce. So I noticed something really interesting about them, though. In the morning when I'd go down, they'd all be tucked in little corners and everything, and I'd start dispatching them. And I thought it was really interesting that when it's dark out, they all go around these lights. But as soon as the real daylight comes, they all go, ooh, and they start squinching into these little corners everywhere. And I thought, we're not that different. We like to swarm around shiny objects. But when the real light shows up, we stick our collective heads in the corner and wait for darkness so we can wait for something shiny to come along again. Science of Mind minister Dr. Heather Dawn Clark wrote about this in December 2007 Creative Thought magazine. And she talked about seasonal affective disorder, where light deprivation in the winter causes a form of depression. So there's lots of people who basically get up and go to work in the dark, and then they come home in the dark, and the only thing they're exposed to for most of the time is artificial light. And of course, they find living under artificial light is far from ideal. And that last sentence really got Dr. Clark thinking. Artificial light is far from ideal. And she believes it's a metaphor for our spiritual evolution and awakening. She says, artificial light represents all the ways we may try to feel better about ourselves, whether we're rewarding ourselves with a box of chocolates, a latte, a shopping trip, a martini. We're still looking for something outside of ourselves to satisfy the longing. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. What's mistaken is our attempt to satisfy ourselves with them. It's artificial lighting. True light can only be found within us. It's not dependent upon anything, including the sun. It is the inner awareness of spirit and the most natural light there is. Yet, even when the light of the real beams brightest around us, we can still find all kinds of things to distract us. The woes of the day and getting caught up in our emotional issues, but shine a crazy idea or a false idol our day, and bam, we're all over that bad boy. So in this world are many, many ways to amuse ourselves. As the ego has taken stronger foothold, more and more stimulation for the senses. I know I've talked about that before. Less and less quiet for the mind. we must take time for self. We must take time to reflect and to regenerate. So, what is light in the spiritual realm? Is it a metaphor? Adamantine crystal-like particles of pure potential? Light is one of the synonyms for God. God is light. God is the substance of every atom. As Bonnie said, Reverend Bonnie said last week about the Sikh faith, atoms make up everything, and God is in every atom, so every single atom is light. This is the field of pure potential. In John 1:5, it says, "This is the message we have heard from him and announced to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all." Light, only light. So then I have to ask, what's darkness? Artists use darkness to emphasize and contrast the presence of light, but that's not exactly a new trick. We do that all the time. Psychotherapists examine the myriad of superstitions, illusions, maladies, derangements that bedevil us. We have expressions to discuss the dark times, dark night of the soul, this is our darkest hour. We use the term darkness to describe things that reflect the lower vibrations of humanity, the darkness of evil. And these ideas all point to that which we most fear and loathe. And so we're drawn to the light. We seek it and we crave it. And it seems to me we're so enamored of chasing the light that we might have grown a small attachment to the idea of darkness so that we can chase it some more. It's the dancing shadows on the cave wall, right? The fires burning brightly in the middle of the cave, but we're all sitting there going, ooh, that's pretty. Just as gratitude feeds the energy of giving, when we be the light, we expand that field of love that we call God. Being light is what fills our longing. Light begets light. We will all leave an imprint on the fabric of the cosmos. And will it look like the blazing sun? Will our rays bore through the darkness like a laser beam? Will we fill a dark room with light? Reverend Bonnie and I were just at the 10th anniversary of the Rio Grande Center in Albuquerque, and it was a really, really lovely event. There were lots of twinkling lights and candles and happy hearts and songs about light. And it was fun because, we went in, sat down, and shortly after they started, and they spotted us from the stage and said, "Las Cruces is in the house." And right then I looked over, and in the front row I could see Dr. Ken, Reverend Ken Gordon, and his wife, Dr. Deborah Gordon from Canada, sitting in the front row. And I went, "Canada's in the house." I had a little moment there. He gave a wonderful message. Reverend Martha was on fire, and Dr. Gordon gave a wonderful message. He said, it's nice to have celebrations because otherwise we begin to fall asleep and take it all for granted. And let's face it, any celebration of light is a celebration of God. It's another opportunity to awaken to the reality and the truth of who we are. So we're coming up on Hanukkah, and of course that's known as the Festival of Lights. And even if it's not part of your tradition, I think it's really important to know what it's about and honor those who are moved by it. But when I was researching it, I realized there was such a massive and deep history, I couldn't even begin to understand it properly. But here's the short version. In the 2nd century BCE, the Holy Land was ruled by Syrian Greeks who tried to force the people of Israel to accept Greek culture and belief. And against all odds, a small band of faithful Jews, led by Judah the Maccabee, defeated one of the mightiest armies on earth, drove the Greeks from the land, reclaimed their holy temple, and rededicated it to the service of God. And when they sought to relight the menorah, they found only a single cruse of olive oil that had escaped contamination by the Greeks. That olive oil was only enough to last for 1 day. Yet, when they lit the menorah, it burned brightly for 8 days, long enough for new oil to be prepared under conditions of ritual purity and then continue the burning of the menorah. So to commemorate and publicize these miracles, the sages instituted the festival of Hanukkah. And you have to understand that the menorah was incredibly sacred. It was the symbol of the people of Israel long before the Star of David. And its creation is said to have been described in great detail by God. It first appears in Exodus chapter 25. As God instructs them how to make it, it was to be fashioned of pure gold, hammered out of one piece, 3 branches on either side, all 6 cups to be shaped like almond blossoms, complete with leaves and petals, all hammered out of one piece. Including the central post, there would be 7 lamps in all, so as to give light to the space in front of it. So just imagine the light given by this massive menorah in the dark tent would have been a powerful symbol of God's light and holiness in a dark and sinful world. In fact, all the items that God instructed people to make were to, quote, serve as a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. And I think maybe this is one of the reasons that proponents of higher teachings insist on elegance. The challenge faced by the Jewish people at that time was unlike any that had come before, because coming out from under Greek rule wasn't a smooth transition. Hellenism, which was the term used to describe the influence of Greek culture, was perceived by the Jews as a noxious blend of hedonism and philosophy. And the conventional tools of their tradition weren't proving sufficient to return the people to the fold. Only the pure oil, the supra-rational, supra-egotistical essence of the Jewish soul could illuminate their way out of the mud swamps of Hela. That's a quote. So the eternal lesson of Hanukkah was that intellect might be man's highest faculty, but it can also be the instrument of his degradation to the lowest depths. Hanukkah celebrates the cleansing of the holy temple from Hellenic corruption, the triumph of the pristine essence of the Jewish soul, represented by this small, pure cruse of oil that burned in the menorah for 8 days over the mud of Greece. We each possess, they go on to say, we each possess such a small, pure cruse of oil in the pith of our souls, a reserve of supra-rational commitment to our Creator, with the power to illuminate our lives with a pure, inviolable light. So why did God make a miracle involving light? Well, it seems pretty straightforward to me. I am the way, the truth, the light. Here's a reminder. In the Zohar, which is widely considered the most important work of Jewish mysticism, which explains the secrets of the Bible, the universe, life, and everything. Honestly, every single word I read when I was researching caused me to have to go and research something else. Anyway, in the Zohar, there's an argument about the nature of darkness, and it asks, is darkness an entity unto itself, or is it merely a lack of light? And the determination was, it's a lack of light. Well, that makes things easier. All we have to do is turn on the light, go inside, realize the self as light, and turn up the volume. There are light festivals held all over this globe. And again, we love festivals, don't we? Especially ones with pretty lights. And the evening comes and the natural light goes down and all those twinkling and sparkly lights go and Christmas lights on our trees. And it's pretty, isn't it? It makes us feel festive and happy. They bring us together. They foster community. They remind us to laugh and be buoyant. But it's important to remember that light festivals are metaphors for what is real. Knowing that each of us has a portion of that divine within us can illuminate our perceptions of each other. When we label somebody, we identify them by that label. But each of us, every one of us, is a multifaceted being encapsulating the full spectrum of feelings and experience as an expression of the divine light. That's the truth of who we are. We have an opportunity in this moment to see each other. Look at each other. Seriously, take a moment and look at each other. It's time to be real. It's time to be authentic. And like moths to the light, we are attracted to what is true. So back to the miracle of that cruse, that single cruse of oil. The dictionary defines miracle as an extraordinary event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws, and it's often attributed to a divine agency. And in my last talk, I quoted Einstein and Tolle, who both pointed to the idea that everything is a miracle, even that which can be explained by science. And the reality is, as soon as we try to define that word, we attempt to put it in a box, or to put in a box that which cannot be contained. Across time, people have experienced what we call miraculous events, yet something as simple as how a seed grows is inexplicable. Even our own birth is a miracle. Now, in my own life, I've had experiences that left me in awe, and that's the marker. If we're not in awe, we're not paying attention. 8 years ago, I was in Australia on Magnetic Island, and one minute I was whizzing happily around the coastline on a scooter, and the next minute my scooter had gone off a cliff and I was down the road. I was told I'd need to stay in a burn unit for months, and I would have to have skin grafts, and I remember thinking, well, that's not going to happen. And I literally flew back to Canada the following day, and 9 days later, I had new pink skin. I can't pull my sleeve up. I had new pink skin everywhere, except for a few little flecks of the pavement from Magnetic Island, which remain. I was later told that I'd actually been given a healing, but I didn't need anybody to tell me that. That was pretty apparent. When my eldest son was 17, he weirdly and suddenly contracted a very serious, extremely rare autoimmune disorder. But go figure, one of the only doctors in North America who knew what it was happened to be at the hospital he was in, diagnosed it, so he was put on the right medication immediately, and prayers were coming from all over the world. And we happened to meet, actually, the real Santa Claus, who told him how to position his mind. And bingo bango, 16 years later, he's a healthy boy. In 1994, Reverend Tanya was driving in Utah, and she hit black ice, and her car went flying off the side of the mountain. And she recalls she was rolling down the mountainside, and there was a sheer cliff on either side, and she remembers yelling while she was flying through the air, "I'm not done yet." Clearly. And Reverend Bonnie prayed for years and years and years for a baby. She wanted a child. And finally, she did the practice. She put a crib, set up a nursery and put in a crib. And every day, despite the protestations of the doubters who said, you're just setting yourself up for a fall, every day she looked at that crib and just imagined a sweet little baby in it. And 6 months later, she adopted a baby boy. It takes way longer than 6 months to have an adoption. Who had a new baby on Friday night or Saturday morning at 1:30 in the morning. To which I respond, she gets 4 grandbabies, and I actually don't have any. So I think she should pony up the last one, but she's not going for it. And here's one more. This morning, I woke up. A dog licked my face. I talked to a friend. I saw the sun come through a pretty pink blossom in the window. Miracles abound. There's a book called Return to the One by Brian Hines. It's about a 3rd century mystic Plotinus. It's actually one of the ones I had to study when I was taking my practitioner training, although I'm not sure they do it anymore. Anyway, he says, why hasn't a miracle been performed that is so grand, so out of the ordinary, so impossible to disregard that believers and unbelievers alike are left awestruck at the display of otherworldly powder? Like, why not add another full-sized moon in the night sky? That'd be the sort of thing that would get people's attention. And while they're at it, if they could just emblazon believe across it, that'd probably do the trick. And he goes on then to quote Plotinus, even the ones in heaven are conformed to the pattern of the all. In other words, if we're to believe that God is all and everywhere present, then it would follow that everything imaginable already exists, if not in form, then in mind. Everything is a miracle. And yet, in the vastness of the mind of God, it's just another day in heaven. We've gotten so caught up in the created, the material side of the world that we've forgotten to put our attention to the Creator. When we hold our attention there, we see that nothing is really a miracle because it's all extraordinary. And just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen, and just because we can't explain it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. We are living miracles. Don't be afraid to let your Christed nature show. Don't be afraid to let your God light show. Here, Rumi and Hafiz and I get to dance together for a moment. We are the light bringers. We are not a drop in the ocean. We are the entire ocean in a drop. Our radiance shines in every atom of creation, and yet our petty desires keep it hidden. Wherever there is darkness, we must shine the light. Light the menorah, have a festival, go within until we know we are light, and then let it shine. What is this precious love and laughter budding in our hearts? It is the glorious sound of a soul waking up. Light, only light. Ooh. Laugh out loud. Light, only light. Don't you know it yet? It is your light that lights the world.